To truly understand this, we must consider the immense power that comes with controlling history. History is not just a collection of past events, it's a framework for understanding our present and shaping our future. If you control the narrative of history, you can influence how people think, what they value, and even the very structures of society. To put it simply, history is power. By altering the historical timeline, powerful figures or institutions can guide society toward their own goals, molding generations of people to accept and follow their worldview without ever questioning the origins of that worldview. The role of institutions in shaping collective memory. The idea of controlling history through manipulation isn't new. In fact, it's been used throughout the ages by institutions, whether religious, political, or academic. Institutions have long held the power to create and control knowledge, and that control has often been used to shape and mold societies to their advantage. Take, for example, the Catholic Church during the medieval period. The Church was not just a religious body, it was a political power, a center of learning, and the primary institution that controlled the flow of knowledge. It dictated what could be studied, what could be published, and more importantly, what was omitted. Many of the classical texts from ancient civilizations were preserved by the Church, but they were also selectively edited, altered, or hidden, depending on what the Church deemed acceptable. When the Renaissance occurred in Europe, a time of intellectual and artistic rebirth, it wasn't simply a return to ancient knowledge. It was also a rebirth of certain ideas that the Church and other institutions had allowed to flourish. The sudden resurgence of Greek and Roman thought, alongside new scientific discoveries, may have been seen as a rebirth of civilization, but it was also a way of resetting the intellectual narrative to fit the needs of the ruling elites, the selective historical records, and the missing years. But let's get back to the core of the theory. How could 300 years of history be inserted into our timeline? The argument here is that history, as we know it, has been selectively constructed. Events that were never recorded or were deliberately erased were replaced by fabricated ones. The gap in time is said to be filled with events that didn't happen in the way we think. For instance, let's talk about the Dark Ages. The term itself is a bit of a misnomer. Historians have often referred to this period as a dark time, because it was supposedly marked by cultural stagnation, ignorance, and a lack of historical records. But what if the idea of the Dark Ages was created not as an accurate reflection of the past, but as a convenient narrative to cover up the missing years? If key events or periods were fabricated, the term Dark Ages could serve as a metaphor for a period where the truth was obscured. Consider ancient civilizations. Civilizations that, by all accounts, should have been far more advanced than their supposed timeline would suggest. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, they were making architectural, scientific, and artistic strides that, according to conventional history, shouldn't have been possible for their time. If you look at the pyramids or other ancient monuments, the level of craftsmanship and engineering is mind-boggling for a society supposedly lacking advanced technology. So what if this ancient knowledge didn't come from ancient times at all? What if the knowledge was in fact a carryover from a much older period, one that was erased from history to make room for the fabricated timeline? What if the artifacts we associate with the ancient world were, in reality, relics of a lost civilization, misattributed to a later period? The political agenda behind the time gap. If we think about the historical records that have survived, many of them were written by the victors of a war. Empires, dynasties, and ruling classes have been writing history to suit their interests for centuries. And when you control history, you control the future. This is where the idea of a fabricated timeline becomes especially important. The theory posits that the creation of these 300 missing years wasn't just about creating a smoother narrative. It was about controlling the future of humanity. The rulers of the time, whether they were monarchs, religious leaders, or elites in society, needed to ensure that history was constructed in a way that kept their power intact. They needed to create a sense of progress, of movement forward, so that the people would believe they were on a steady path of improvement. But in reality, they were being kept in check by the powers that controlled knowledge. The fabricated scientific and technological advancements. Now let's consider the impact of this fabricated timeline on scientific and technological progress. The Industrial Revolution is often seen as one of the greatest leaps in human development, moving society from agrarian economies to industrialized capitalist ones. But according to this theory, the Industrial Revolution didn't happen as we've been taught. Instead, it may have been a reimagining of earlier technological advancements. The so-called invention of the steam engine, the printing press, and other innovations might have been exaggerated or invented to fit the new historical narrative. The rise of the factory system, the mass production of goods, and the social transformations of the time might not have been as sudden or as revolutionary as we've been led to believe. What if those events were part of a constructed timeline designed to reinforce the power dynamics of the time? Instead of being natural progressions of humanity's advancement, they were engineered events, carefully placed to solidify a social and political agenda. The rise of science and technology might not have been the result of steady progress at all. It could have been an effort to legitimize certain institutions, namely the scientific community, that helped perpetuate the illusion of progress. As knowledge was systematically codified, institutionalized, and disseminated, the narrative that we were moving forward in time was reinforced. But if you strip away the fabricated layers of the timeline, the picture of human progress starts to look far less linear and far more contrived. The role of the printing press in creating the narrative. One of the most powerful tools in the creation of this fabricated history was the printing press. When Johannes Gutenberg introduced movable type to Europe in the mid-15th century, it revolutionized the way information was shared. Books could be printed quickly, cheaply, and distributed widely. It allowed for the rapid spread of ideas and knowledge across the continent. But what if the printing press was more than just a technological innovation? What if it was used to disseminate a carefully constructed historical narrative that aligned with the needs of the elite? The theory posits that the press was not just a tool for spreading knowledge, it was a tool for spreading control. By printing books, pamphlets, and articles that adhered to the constructed timeline, those in power could ensure that their version of history was the one that dominated. Books and printed materials could be used to influence public opinion, spread ideologies, and ensure that the masses adhered to the newly fabricated timeline. The spread of knowledge, then, wasn't just a way of advancing society, it was a means of maintaining control. Modern history, a carefully crafted narrative. So where does this leave us today? The narrative we have about modern history, about the rise of industrialization, the advancement of science, and the spread of democracy, might not be the full story. In fact, it could be far from it. What if we've been living in a carefully constructed world, shaped by those who have controlled the narrative for centuries? What if the history we've been taught is nothing more than an illusion designed to keep us in line, to make us believe that we are living in a time of unprecedented progress, when in reality we are stuck in a fabricated past, a future unwritten? And here's the most unsettling thought. What if this narrative is still being shaped today? In our modern age of media, technology, and information, the control of history is more powerful than ever. Today, we are bombarded with information from countless sources, news outlets, social media, academic institutions. But how much of this information is shaped by the same forces that created our historical narrative? Could it be that the timeline is still being manipulated and we as a society are still living in a world that's been crafted by those in power? Could it be that the next 100 years will be written by the very same people who've shaped the past 300? It's a question we may never have an answer to. But one thing is certain, history is not just a record of what happened, it's a story, and someone is writing it.